Hi everyone and welcome to one of this month's full-length tutorials based on flowers, and this time around it's part of my big Westie painting in the garden. I'm going to focus in on some of those pots of flowers and show you how I built those up. There are so many flowers in this piece, it was really complicated when I looked at the photo reference and I really had to take it a little bit at a time. So hopefully with this tutorial I'll give you the tools to be able to look at a complicated area of foliage or flowers and be able to simplify it. In particular in this project, the flowers were mostly in the background, so I didn't want them to be quite as detailed as the Westie. I wanted the dog to be the main focal point, even though the painting is very busy around him. So hopefully with this tutorial I'll give you the tools to be able to simplify what seems like very complicated area in your photo reference, and also help you with choosing some of those very tricky pinks that I had to use in this piece. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get started. So first of all, we're going to focus on this grey pot of flowers, and I'm going to show you how I build up that cluster of flowers and leaves. In this tutorial, you're going to see me use quite a lot of pastels that I don't have colour codes for. This one in particular is Art Spectrum's Red Bee. That's B for butterfly. And I'll try and list these all at the beginning of the video, which you'll have just seen. But I don't have colour codes for all of these other brands of pastel. I've only really got my Unison colour codes. So any unusual pinks that pop up, I'll try and name those when you first see them so that you have those names as you see them as well. I had to use quite a few new pinks in this piece. I bought a lot of pinks specifically for this painting and they were wonderful, especially this Art Spectrum Red Bee. I really fell in love with it. And the first thing I'm doing is looking for those mostly in the center of the flowers where it's really vibrant. Just like anything else, I'll be thinking of this in terms of dark to light. And as well as the flowers, you can see quite a few leaves throughout this. Two things that tend to go hand in hand when you're painting foliage. And towards the end of this tutorial, I'm going to focus mostly on this pot of flowers as it was quite complicated, but really good for explaining colour theory on, and also for trying to soften up a sharp detail, not going into too much detail. But towards the end of this, I'll also show you some of the pots of fuchsias in the rest of the painting. I'll give you a little overview of a section of that as well. So we'll cover a couple of different types of flower in this one tutorial. So you can see that leaf just behind the first flower that I started, and it's quite backlit by the sun, so it's really gleaming a very yellowy green. And I'd like it to stand out really crisply against the backdrop, which is, as you can see, really out of focus. So my background in this piece is really soft focus. This mid-ground area with the flower pots has a little more detail, but it's still quite out of focus. And then the dog and everything on that plane of field, I try to get completely in focus. So I'm always playing with how soft my edges are in terms of where the object is in the composition, which plane of field is it on. But for areas like this, where this leaf really stands out, it really pops out from the background, I focus on making those edges nice and sharp. And then there'll be other edges that I leave a little softer for a different effect. But anywhere I can make a really nice colour contrast and make this next plane of field really pop from the one behind, then that's where your sharp edges come in very useful. So really trying to add some lovely vibrant greens here. And such a vibrant palette for this entire painting. If you'd like to take on a certain section of this painting, for example, the flower pot that we're working on. I'll provide the full photo reference for you this month. You can choose one section of this painting, as every individual section of this painting was really beautiful. And my tutorials aren't always the paint along style where you can sit down and paint along with me. Quite often I make use of a really good part of a painting, something that I think demos a certain thing really well. And in this case, I hope to revisit this painting again and make further tutorials from it, so that eventually you will be able to go and look at individual tutorials for almost the entire painting. At the moment though, the way I'm working is picking out the areas that are most useful for our monthly theme. But as always, you can request other areas of the paintings as tutorials. And now this beautiful pink, this is Great American Artworks, and the colour is Jubilee 700.1. Again, the full list of the colours are at the beginning of the video, but just so that you recognise them to look at. And this one is actually a Holbein Permanent Red number 3. And I make use of this one quite a lot. It's really nice, a little bit harder than the Unisons, actually a little bit harder than most of the pink pastels that I bought. But it really made it useful in the early layers, and it was very easy to use the sharp edges on it. Somewhere in between the Faber-Castell sticks and the Unisons, I'd say, for softness. Now we have a lovely Diane Townsend. This is 94L. Really random code names for all these different pastel brands. I'm really making use of a wide range of different brands in this piece. One thing that I find about the Unison colour range, they have a fantastic range of every colour, except I would have to say pink. I do like the pinks that they have, but I felt that they're really lacking in certain vibrant, almost bubblegum Barbie pinks that I was missing. And there are certain times, like with a project like this with such vibrant pink flowers, I always felt I just couldn't quite capture that vibrance. So there's only so much you can do if you're quite limited in your colour palette, and especially when it comes to the world of flowers, because there's just no way to fake that vibrance. You do need some really good vibrant colours to help you. So at this point, I'm looking for some of those really dark gaps in between the petals and the leaves. If you've already seen my new how-to this month, you'll hear me talk a lot about using black within a painting, and white as well, but in particular here, I'm really not scared to come in very heavily with black at times. It really is jet dark in there, and if I can get that contrast really nicely the way it is in the photo reference, it will really make my pinks and my brighter colours around it sing. So even when I'm painting foliage or something like this, I'm usually trying to think from the background to the foreground. So I look for things that are behind and I paint those in first. I'm always looking the edges that are on top to be at the forefront of the composition as well, so that I can really control those nice edges. I always find it much trickier coming back in, filling in background after I've done the foreground. So at this point I'm just looking for the flowers and the leaves that are overlapping, and also using some of my colours from the background to pay particular attention to those edges. Now this is a Daler Rowney and it's number 562, tint number 2. A really nice Barbie-like pink there. And like the Holbeins, they're a little bit harder than the likes of the Unison or the Great American. So this is the first bit of highlighting that I'm looking for. For some reason, I started on the right side of this flower pot. Normally I would work sort of left to right, but I think I really fancied the look of that backlit leaf that I've just done. And so I started over on this side of the flowers. I really like the areas that are hit by sunlight in a painting, so I'm often drawn to those areas first. And when I look at one of these flowers, when I break it down, I'm just looking for shapes and areas of colour in their most basic form. When you really zone in on an area like this, I just try and forget that it's a flower. I just look at it as colours and shapes. And that's all I try to depict. And I'm going really bright on these highlights. They're going to mix into the pink underneath a little bit, but anywhere that's sunlit on these flowers, I'm going to really exaggerate those highlights. In a way, I suppose I'm trying to capture them a little bit more graphically. Most of the actual body of the flowers will be done with the soft pastels you'll see. And anywhere that I use pastel pencil, it will be a lot of the time to neaten up edges, but not a lot of fine detail on each flower's head in this. And it's really important to note that while I will make use of white in the sunlit areas, I'm going to show you my substitute for white in the shadow areas on the flowers, and that really is the main key to capturing the sunlight and the 3D quality of the flowers. If I were working on these flowers a little bit bigger, I could of course start looking for some more of the subtle gradients on each petal. But on this scale, and as part of a background, I'm constantly trying to remind myself to not go into super detail. If I can get the general shapes and my colour choices nice and accurate, it should sit behind the dog really nicely and not distract too much. If I let myself get into really fiddly detail with the pastel pencils back here, then I find it competes too much with the other areas that you want to be in focus. So using some of my darker greens, just starting to block in some of the leaves, looking for the darkest areas on each leaf. You'll notice that on the leaves that are sunlit, I'm using greens with much more yellow in them, pretty much like this one I've just picked up, really vibrant colour. And it looks so lovely next to those vibrant pinks. Such a lovely combination when you get really vibrant pink and vibrant yellowy green together. And then in the shadow areas where you see the leaves that have shadows on them, you'll see that I use not only darker greens, but greens that have a lot more blue content. And if you can train your brain to think of colour in terms of warm and cool, it will help you so much when you're making these colour decisions during your own painting. You can ask yourself a few questions when you're trying to choose the right colour. Is it a warm colour? Does it have more orange, yellow, red in it? Or is it a cool colour? Does it have more blue, more violet in it? And it's especially important when painting something like this that has a really sharp light contrast in it. Just trying to pick out a little bit of shine on the very edge of the leaf. I seem to have spent quite a long time on this one leaf. Sometimes I see an edge of something and I just really want to get that edge spot on. I'll be pretty quick in other areas of the painting, but sometimes little details catch my eye, and I think if I can just add that little area in, it will add a bit of quality to that whole area, and other parts around it can be a little less refined, a little less finished, but I search for those little pleasing parts in the photo reference and pay particular attention to them. And that's where you're constantly using your editing part of your brain. In a way, I'm copying the photo reference, of course, but in a lot of ways, I'm trying to look at the photo reference and see the most simplified version of it. And this beautiful Art Spectrum Red Bee. Even if you don't buy any other Art Spectrum pastels, if you can get hold of one of these, it's just worth having to look at. In person, it's so vibrant. I've got some other pastels that do that to my eyes, but this one is particularly vibrant. They're quite a soft pastel brand, not unlike Unisons if you've tried those. Maybe a touch softer, but really nice consistency. And you can see that I'm going around trying to pick out the darkest areas of the flower, but I'm not using any colours that are really dark. I really want these flowers to remain vibrant. So I don't want to make the colours in the centre of the flowers muddy or in any way dark. I want them to retain that lovely red vibrance. And this is the Diane Townsend again. I bought a few of those and I really like their consistency. They produce really pretty pinks. But you can see that for flowers like this, I need colours that are quite a vibrant red pink, right through to the pretty bubblegum pink. And you need quite a range. So this is the first time I'm bringing in a little bit of lilac there. You're going to see a lot more lilac throughout the shadow areas on the flowers. This is my lovely Great American. Another favourite that I got in the pink set. If you haven't seen that video, I actually bought a trial pack of all different brands of pink pastels, all the way from Dakota Pastels in the US, and I made a video about them so you can see the full range of pinks. This was the first project I got to try them out on. And I just don't think this project would have been possible with my previous selection of reds and pinks. But my two favourites from that set, after having used them a lot, are definitely that vibrant Art Spectrum and, well, there it is, and what I was just using there, the Great American. Both of those colours are just so vibrant. And with the softer pastels, you get a good amount of pigment off onto the paper. So my substitute for white within the shadow areas on the flowers is going to be a lot of light lilacs. And if you really look in closely at the photo reference, I hope you can see where a lot of those lilac colours are coming from. But as soon as I start to add any of this highlight colour, and this is as bright really as I want to go in the shadow areas, and you can see the difference between this highlight and the highlights on the flower to the right. And in its very basic form, that's how I tackle painting light and shade. I've got one set of rules for the sunlit areas and one set of rules for the shadow areas. And it's as simple as that, it really is. It's hard not to break those rules. I find it tricky still, especially when I'm painting a white dog or something. I just keep wanting to pick up the white pastel. But I know that it's going against the rules. And if I really stick to that, I've been finding that the photorealism, or just the realism, the 3D quality of my work seems to get better the more strict I am about that. So I'm just trying to pick out, with the big fat pastel, some little areas, just hinting at some of the highlighted petals. Again, those edges feel important, so I'll keep coming back in around those and shaping them, strengthening them. I especially love working on velour for this type of project. I find I can get such soft edges when I want. Unlike on some other papers, I'm still finding it quite tricky to soften the edges on pastel mat or even on the harder sanded papers. But when I want a sharp edge, it's totally possible on velour as well. You can see that I just have to come back in and work at that edge quite a lot. So once I get the basics of a couple of flowers in, I start working on blocking in other areas. And of course, sometimes I pick up a pastel that I don't end up using, especially with these pinks. As for some of them, it was my first try on that particular brand. So I had no idea how they were going to react on this paper. But it's never a problem to mix and match with pastels. Quite often you're better using harder pastels on the lower layers, and all those important marks, those splashes of colour, are much better coming from the softer pastels that give you more pigment on the paper. So again, just thinking about the background there and how it's going to contrast against those flowers at the top of the pot. And I've got to say, poor Andrew on the colour coding of this piece. I pick up so many different colours throughout this. I think I must have hit my own record for how many colours I use in one painting on this entire piece. Again, I always try to keep some colour harmony throughout the painting, so I'll make use of many of those colours all across the piece. But there were times that I picked up lots of pieces for one dot here and there throughout this piece. Not easy to colour code. But I hope that you find it helpful to have a lot of the colours displayed and the full colour list at the beginning. It's not necessary for you to have all these exact colours, but I hope it opens your eyes to the types of colours you will need to tackle something similar to this. So back in with that lovely, vibrant art spectrum. You can see how it next to the lilac, it really rings out from the painting. I've tried painting some pink flowers in the past, and I found that they turned out a bit dull, a lot duller always than the photo reference. And it's just not a colour that you can fake. It's the same with oil painting or other types of painting. You can't mix yourself up a really vibrant red or pink. It comes directly from the pigment used to create the pastels. And I've spoken to Unison about this colour before, and they say it's one of the most tricky pastel colours to make. Very difficult to get a hold of the right pigments and materials to make vibrant pinks. Now I'm coming in with that white to pick out some of those sunlit areas around the top. I really like that area where the sunlight is catching some of those petals. So just remember, try and make the amount of detail that you're painting relevant to the scale of the painting. If you're working on smaller flowers like these, bear in mind that very, very small detail is going to get quite lost in there. This is where I start looking for bigger shapes, representing bigger areas with flat colour, as opposed to trying to get every little detail. So I treat it just like a bit of a puzzle. As I move across the piece, I try to see areas in bigger blocks and shapes. Once I fill in some of the darkness in behind the flowers, it really helps me see their outline better. Also using a touch of blue violet here on one of the leaves. You can see how cool that light on the leaf looks in the shadows there. And just starting to pick out some little pockets of light coming through and playing on, for example, that leaf in the foreground. Again, thinking of things quite graphically, trying to make bigger shapes with the soft pastels. And just continuing to pick out some of those brightest little areas around the edges of the petals. Might go for something a little less vibrant than the white when I come down inside the flower. But it's all about looking for the really obvious shapes first, getting those blocked in. And you can see that I leave a lot of gaps in the work. And I just keep coming back and filling in the gaps. It's just like a jigsaw puzzle foliage to me. And I particularly love pink or red as a contrast to green. Obviously red and green being opposite colours on the colour wheel. And they go so well together. So those leaves dotted about the composition here, especially those ones that are being hit by the sun, they're going to really pop out from amongst the pink flowers. You can see there that I can use the pastel pencil to shape that petal even before adding the highlight. If I really define the edge of it and then come in with the soft pastel, it's very easy. Much easier then to get the pastel to go just where I want it. On velour, sort of make a little indent in the paper when you use the pastel pencil. And now just breaking up some of that solid black in there. I don't want large chunks of solid black in my painting, so I'm always trying to look for some colour in there. Just giving a hint of some leaves that might be hiding in the darkness. But at this stage, I had sort of figured out that using those roughly 4 different pinks, along with some of my unison lilacs, that seemed to give me the effect of each of these flowers. For me, the first ones are always the trickiest, as I'm trying to figure out the palette. After that, I try to keep the same colours going across all of the flowers. So it really is like looking for a pattern, trying to spot what each flower does. And it's really just noticing those colours and patterns and then applying it across them all. You'll notice the same in this month's full tutorial on painting bluebells. It's about figuring out that flower and its pattern, how you can achieve it with less marks, and then repeat, and especially with bluebells. And this month I'll also be releasing a sunflower tutorial. I'm currently working on the pastel matte version. I did my first one on Sennelier pastel card, and I'm trying out 2 different papers, the exact same little painting, so that I can do a direct comparison. But it's a really nice close-up of a sunflower with a bee in it, and I'm going to release that one later this month, and that will be a project that you can download the photograph, set yourself up the same piece and paint along with me. But I do like using parts of my bigger projects, parts of my actual commissions, to show you my techniques on. I find that if I break away to do smaller studies that are only intended to be tutorials, I tend to not put quite as much effort into those. I put my full effort into my commissions, and therefore I can really show you every technique that I have going. I can show you exactly what I do to get my pieces looking the way I want. Whereas I always feel when I'm doing something that's just destined to be a tutorial or a demo, I perhaps don't give it my 100% and full time like I do with these pieces. So I like being able to take smaller sections of these paintings and really show you the time that I apply to my commissioned work. But I'm also aware that lots of you would like to be able to paint along with me more often. And I do have more demos like that planned for this year. Just to let you know as well, I haven't given up on the idea of doing my live YouTube demos. I'm really just being sunk at the moment with bad Wi-Fi here in the south of Spain. I'm looking into other options. But this past 2 weeks, the whole town has had really bad internet connection. There's a problem. So I've even found it really difficult to get this month's tutorials uploaded. But those are definitely things I'm working on. I would like to be able to share more shorter projects with you, things that I can take you from beginning to end. But hopefully the more I revisit these projects and make future tutorials from them, eventually I will have a full library where you can access every piece of a project like this. I would love to do a still life month this year, Perhaps I can show you how I created a couple of the pots in this project, as I really enjoyed painting the pots in this. And I would also love to tackle an actual still life, set up a little still life with nice lighting. So maybe that will be something I plan in a few months' time. So you can see how quite simple what I've done on the flowers is. It's judging when it's enough to give the effect. So I'm really not concerned about photorealism with these. They're that little bit more blurred in the background. And a slightly looser approach will definitely help. And sometimes I take a break from the pinks and I glance across the rest of it, see if I can fill in another bit of darkness. And I think that's key to when I'm working on something that looks confusing or complicated. One of my tricks, I think, is to not work on any one area for too long, sort of jump around a little bit, give my eyes a break from one area, go and focus on something else for a while. That's definitely one of my coping mechanisms for when I have a project like this. But looking for all those darkest areas, those dark areas that are going to help the lighter edges on top really stand out. And I've time-lapsed a couple of areas in this tutorial. Just these areas that are extremely repetitive. You can see what I'm doing here, just trying to find some of the outlines. And again, with some of those darker greens, I'm choosing greens with more blue in it. And some of my mid-tone greens with a lot more yellow in it. And a bit like with the flowers along the top, you can see that I've just picked out a few highlights around those back leaves. But bit by bit, the jigsaw starts to come together. Now over into this area of flowers. There's a big difference between these flowers and the top right flowers. Much less sunlight hitting these. But I do use that lovely vibrant Art Spectrum to do a lot of my blocking in. I just love the contrast between it and my Unison BV3, I believe, that lovely lilac I've used in the shadows. But like before, I can come in with the big soft pastel, not worry too much about my edges at that stage. And that's where my pastel pencils come in most useful. And I don't mind using pure white. This part of the leaf is really gleaming. I'm making sure I pick out that area of sunlight, leaving good crisp edges between the highlight and the rest of the leaf. Just like a little pocket of sunlight shining through in a gap somewhere. And over to the left of the pot of flowers is really dark. Hardly any light getting in under those flowers to the left, to the leaves underneath. So there's a really lovely contrast in light between the left of the pot and the right side. And as usual, I'm using my black Faber-Castell stick. They're often called crayons when you go online to look for them, but they are pastel sticks, just a little harder than some of the other brands. And they come in this nice, smaller square shape. And black is really the only colour that I use. I use a lot of the black Faber-Castell, simply because it's so jet black. I think because it's a little bit harder than some of the soft pastels, it doesn't go quite as dusty looking when you apply it. And that's that lovely Holbein pink. A little bit more of a fleshy pink than the Great American and the Art Spectrum, which are full-on vibrants. So this pink is a little bit more dull, but a really beautiful shade. And just what I'm after in more of the shadow areas of the flowers. So this piece definitely gave me a good opportunity to experiment with a lot of pastel brands that I haven't tried before. And it's good to do that if you can. You can use lots of different brands in combination with each other, and each brand has a different colour range available. I suppose I just so like the texture of the unisons, and I love many of their colour range as well. The only place I had found them lacking was this pink area, and I think I've definitely solved that now with my palette. But I would definitely recommend the 4 or 5 pinks that I've used throughout this project. I feel like those are pinks I'm going to pick up again and again. So most of the highlights on these flowers in the shadows will of course use only my lilac colours. This piece was one of my most challenging pieces ever. I spent a full 2 weeks on this. Each one of the flower pots took me about a day each. I would do about 4 or 5 hours each time I sat down at this. I easily spent 4 or 5 hours just on one flower pot and its flowers. Most of these areas took 2 days each. Quite a big painting, so quite a big scale for each area, and so much going on in each area, so I really had to keep my patience, try my best not to rush any area. But I have to say I really enjoyed painting this particular pot of flowers. Bluebells and the fuchsias that I also had to paint in this piece. Those smaller flowers can be a bit more fiddly, a bit trickier. But I really enjoy painting these slightly bigger flower heads. I'm not quite sure what sort of flower this is. It reminds me a little bit of begonias, but I'm not sure. If any of you are flower experts, I'd love to hear. But I'm using even darker highlight colour in here. It's barely a highlight colour really, it's more of a mid-tone. But it's so much darker on this flower. And I'm even using a little bit of brown pastel pencil just to add a bit of my darkest shading in there. Then I'm picking out those highlighted areas with my really vibrant BV. But can you see the difference that that's making when I use white as my highlight colour on those top flowers? And when you switch over into the shadows and those highlight colours become lilac, it still has the same effect in terms of, you know, there's still a highlight there, but they're much more subtle in the shadows. That little Holbein pastel, so useful with its sharp edges. And I know I've added quite a harsh line around that flower. I now just try and gradiate some of that darkness out over the leaf. So I don't want to leave anything with a really harsh black outline, even though that can look really nice as an effect. And then something that I always love to look for, just some little pockets of light shining through. And I'm being a little bit bad using so much white in those highlighted areas, but I really wanted them to jump out. So any little pockets of light shining through into the darkness, I really wanted them to pop out. And rather than let all my greens appear very dull in the shadows, I love coming in there too with a little bit of vibrance. Something with a nice bit of edging more towards turquoise, bluey green. So if I look really closely at what I've just done on those couple of flowers here, it really is quite abstract. It's hard when you look at just that on its own. It's hard to say what it really is. It just looks like a mess of little shapes and colours. Quite an abstract shape. And I really love that about painting flowers and foliage. I'm not worrying about whether something's in proportion, whether the eyes are level, whether something's the right size. With this, I can take the barest amount of information from the photo reference, and if I manage to transfer that in some shape or form, as long as I get those colour values nicely, it should give me a really good 3D, almost photographic effect anyway. And I think half the battle with that type of painting is just knowing what to include, what's most important, and what to edit out. And that's why I'm always starting with those bigger shapes and darker colours to begin. Then you should be getting lighter in tone and making smaller shapes as you progress up through the layers. And when I explain things like this, I hope what you take away from it is that you really can simplify things that look very daunting to begin with. I really want to encourage you guys to take on bigger and harder challenges. I spent many years focusing on people and pets, and I really avoided backgrounds for a long time. And I wish I hadn't now. I wish I'd just delved right into that stuff, because once you start to improve your painting skills, there's no reason why you can't apply those techniques to any subject matter. I was watching old episodes of Sky Portrait Artist of the Year recently, And someone asked one of the artists, would you paint this just the same if it were a brick in front of you as opposed to the sitter? And he pretty much replied that yes, he would look at a brick just the same. You're looking for the basic shapes, the way the light is hitting something, and you can use your techniques as a painter. You should really be able to apply them to a lot of different subject matter. And that's why I like to encourage you guys to be braver with backgrounds, because they give you a chance to experiment with painting other subject matters without having to have the whole painting rely on it. So it's much easier to slip a background into a really nice pet portrait. And that's how I started, just by having them as secondary to a main subject. But it eventually did get to the point where I enjoy painting landscapes in their own right. I'm hoping I can get into still life a bit more this year and share some of that with you. I'm just finding a lot of enjoyment from tackling new things at the minute. So pretty well across this pot now. Same as before, using my lovely Vibrant Art Spectrum to do a bit of blocking in. And the Great American seemed to be my next choice of pink. When you hold those two colours beside each other in person, you really wouldn't think of putting them together in a painting. But they were really what I needed for these flowers. Sometimes nature has a funny way of making colour clashes extremely beautiful. I'm just spending a little time now neatening up some of those edges with my black Faber-Castell pencil. So we move the photo reference over to the other side and finish off this left side of the pot. You can see that I haven't actually finished the background, just behind this side of the pot of flowers. I sort of ran out of steam at that point. I really wanted to work on this flower pot and come back to that left side of the piece. So I really do give myself a break from certain areas some days, especially large areas of foliage and things like that. I tire very easily on those areas, but instead of rushing on, I'll stop or work on something else instead. Always trying to keep with a more methodical pace, not rush things. I'm never in a hurry to finish. Well, that's a lie. When I have deadlines, I'm very much in a hurry to finish, but I never rush the actual work. I'll just sit for a late night or something, but I never rush the actual work. I really try to give each area a similar level of my focus and try to find some enjoyment in painting these other elements rather than seeing them as something that I've got to get through until I start painting the dog or some other part of the painting that I like. So I'm always trying to find the enjoyment in this. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, some areas really jump out to me like a really crisp edge of a leaf. And I enjoy painting those things now as much as I would enjoy painting a really beautiful eye or something with a lot of detail in it. But even still, I have to try and break up the task a little bit. I really love this green shade. Lovely bit of blue in that green. Rings out really well from the shadows. Contrasts really nicely against a limey green like this. And again, in with a little dab of my brightest highlight, grey 28 or white. Just picking out a little spot of sunlight coming in. I really like how those little bits of light dance around the flowers, shining through some little gaps. And I pick out a few little highlights on these top flowers using my white and some of those lilacs. before coming down to work on those leaves underneath the flowers. A lot of darkness on this side of the pot. If you look to the flowers on the right of the pot, the flowers are bright and the background is dark. But if you look to these leaves and the flowers on the left of the pot, the background is actually lighter, and it's these leaves that provide real darkness over here. So it's looking about the composition, always judging your values off everything else. Always a good idea to sit and look at your photo reference before you start. Even in grayscale, if you can do that on your computer or on your phone these days, quite simple. If you put it into grayscale, pinpoint the areas that are the most bright and the areas that are the most dark. It's definitely a good thing to have in your head from the very start. And in those shadow areas, I really don't have to go into a huge amount of detail in there. You can see so little detail in the shadows. I can be quite loose with those areas. But that's us almost finished this pot of flowers. For the last little segment of this tutorial, I'm going to take you over to one of the other pots and show you how I built up a little area with some fuchsias in it. Similar colours, similar technique, different flower. I want to try and give you as many different flower types this month and hopefully give you the tools to tackle your own projects with flowers included. Now coming in with a slightly darker purpley pink, this is one of my unisons. Some areas on these flowers to the very left, much darker than anywhere else on the flowers. And this is one of those lovely deep purpley pinks that Unison does really well. But you can see that my darkest value on most of the other flowers has been this Art Spectrum, which is a really vibrant colour. I've tried not to use too many dark values to tone down the flowers. I've wanted to really retain their true vibrance. So really only using that deeper purpley pink on these far left flowers. And I even surprised myself coming in with this colour when I watched back the footage. But just some little dots of more oranges and yellows in there. Reflected colour and light. Colours that I've used throughout the rest of the painting. So don't be afraid to pick up vibrant colours. Be braver with your colour choices. So a few final highlights dotted about. But you can see on each individual flower, there's not a huge amount of detail. It's really just dotting on colour in the right places. Spending the time to really observe your subject matter. And I hope that seeing this complete pot of flowers will let you see how I piece that jigsaw together, how I tackle that whole area in one go just by breaking it up into smaller areas. So let's take a little area over here on this watering can filled with fuchsias. So I've already worked some of those areas, similar to before, looking for the leaves and petals that are in the background and working my way to the foreground. And you can see it's the exact same two colours. I've picked up that Art Spectrum really vibrant red pink, followed by my little Holbein. And where fuchsias are concerned, they've got quite a repetitive pattern. Each one looks quite similar, like it's a little bulb wearing a cap. And in each case, I just try to block that in very roughly. I try to work at the edges from the outside, making sure that each flower is going to be nicely contrasted. And again, because it's pinks and reds against green, those really dark greens just help those pinks jump off the paper. Now this particular fuchsia's pretty much in shadowed light. And again, I've come in with my lilac. Just trying to pick out some little pockets of light where it's hitting the flower. And with each little fuchsia, again, looking in beyond those outer petals. Adding some of that rich purpley pink from Unison. And then, as always, coming back in and shaping the flower from the outside. So it's a similar process with each flower. Looking for where the light's hitting it, trying to block it in with the main 2 or 3 colours, and then looking for ways you can come back in and refine a few details. But if I spent all day refining details on each individual flower, it would literally take me years. I'm always trying to look for the shorthand version, which is what a lot of oil painters do, painting bigger blocks of colour and choosing how much detail to go into after that. So that is a fuchsia in its simplest form. You take what I've just done there and you multiply it up quite a few times. And if you've paid particular attention to where the light is coming and added little speckles of light like this, hopefully you should get a very lively painting of flowers. So each one in itself is quite a simple little thing. It just looks a lot more impressive when you've got so many of them in one painting. So I hope this helps you see a little bit less detail when you're looking at something as complex as this. And I look forward to seeing some of your flower projects this month. I'll be back very soon with the next full-length tutorial showing you bluebells. Until then, happy pastling.